This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
This is the Sick'em Podcast, powered by Rogue Media Network. The Sick'em Podcast is a production of Baylor Athletics. Now, here are your hosts, Katie Smith and the voice of the Bears, John Morris.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Sick'em Podcast, powered by Rogue Media Network. Glad you're with us, John Morris, Katie Smith. Katie, it is an education for us.
It is.
And we hope our listeners every week, but this week especially as we talk Startup Waco with John Passavant.
Yes, so excited to have John Passavant here with us. Thanks for taking the time. We know you have so many meetings, so many things going on, especially this time of year. But yeah, exactly what you said, John. There's so much excitement around all of this NIL space, but also some uncertainty. People have a lot of questions, and so we have the expert with us here today. So we'll start really, really broad. But tell us a little bit about you, John, and what brought you to Waco to start Startup Waco.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Or not to start Startup Waco, but you know what I mean.
That's right. No, I came into the organization when we moved here, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I love talking about this. I love talking about new things that are happening, things that are affecting all of us in the city in new ways, and I think that's why I love working at Startup Waco, and I've loved working with student athletes. So, but first of all, about me. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I found myself in New York City. I ended up being there for about 20 years after school, and I worked in a lot of different industries, focused in the fashion apparel space for a while, then worked with consumer brands and some early stage companies, and then had an opportunity to come to Waco, where my wife is from, and we love Waco. We got married here, we have family here, and we thought it would be, after a couple of kids and living in Brooklyn, we thought maybe moving to Waco would be a good idea, and we found ourselves here. And Startup Waco had started back in 2017, and it was really developed to be a hub of innovation, a hub of entrepreneurship for any entrepreneur in all of Waco, the greater Waco community, and McLennan County. So, you've got a lot of people that are interested. Entrepreneurship has had a moment over the past decade around the country, understanding that you can actually, if you have an idea and you have the desire, you can actually create something for yourself and create and build a business for yourself. Many people have ideas, but they don't know where to start. And so that's what Startup Waco was created to answer, not just for growth companies, but also for all the Main Street entrepreneurs and the restaurants and the food trucks and the barbershops and the things that we need that makes a community have an identity. We wanted to have a place where every entrepreneur could be served. And so that's what Startup Waco is. And it was created, like I said, in 2017. And I came in towards the end of 2019 and have been here since.
Wow, awesome.
Very good. And the timing of that, you came here in 2019.
That's right.
If I remember right, COVID hit right about
That's right.
a little bit after that.
Yes.
What do you do when you're trying to start up and encourage entrepreneurship? And all of a sudden, we've got a pandemic.
That's right. I remember a few months on the job, and we had a board meeting where I presented the 5-year strategic plan for Startup Waco. And that board meeting was on February 28th, 2020. 13 days later, we were completely shut down.
Yeah.
And I think true to the way entrepreneurs react to the circumstances that they're in, you've got to be flexible. You've got to have grit. You've got to get kind of slapped in the face and be willing to stand up and keep pushing for your goals. And so we pivoted. We kind of shifted from, okay, we're going to build all these stakeholders for entrepreneurs here to we're going to serve the ones that are here and suffering, and try to help just survive through this process, which we didn't know if it was going to be a few weeks or a few months, and turned into well over a year of that. And as we began to come out of it, things shifted. Mentalities were different. Some businesses didn't make it. It was a hard time for everyone. But I think looking back, if you're starting your own business, this is not an academic or theoretical exercise for many people. This is their livelihoods. This is their hopes and their dreams. And so certainly if we're saying we're going to be in there with the mix with them, we've got to be willing to get into the fight with them. And that's kind of how we and our staff at Startup Waco see our jobs.
Yeah. You mentioned how y'all have these relationships with so many different entities here in Waco, but Baylor, obviously, the university as a whole, a big part of Waco in the community. And so prior to this GXG project, staying just with Baylor in general, what kind of relationships have y'all had with Baylor prior?
So Baylor was a founding member of the committee that started and formed Startup Waco, both in helping to fund its existence, to providing leadership on our board of directors. In a market that's Waco's size, when you've got a big institution like Baylor, it's going to have its hands and be involved in a lot of the things that are coming out. So that's to be expected. And just the resources that are available here, the human capital available through Baylor has been instrumental in Startup Waco becoming what it is. And so long before I was here, there was a great relationship that was formed with Baylor as an institution, but also specifically with the business school. We worked a lot with entrepreneur students there. We were able to really be sort of, when you take your business out of the university context, what are some safe ways to try ideas and to find product fit in the market, and we could help provide some of those solutions. And so there was a great working relationship across a lot of departments. Interestingly, not so much with athletics, because there was sort of a wall there that businesses and private businesses couldn't really, you couldn't work with players, you couldn't create opportunities for them. And so for the first 3 years of being here, it was really just all departments outside of athletics.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yep.
That wall has somewhat come down.
Crashing
Things
down.
are a lot
Crashing
different
down
now.
is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Startup Waco, 501c3, and part of what you say is you have an inclusion mindset, which is pretty cool, I think, and really applies to, now including our student athletes.
That's
and
right.
Some things you do.
Yeah, so when we say inclusion, we basically look at the entire landscape of the business community in Waco, and even expanding it out to the county and countywide. And we say we want to be a place that aren't just for a certain type of company, but it's for everyone. We want to have answers for everyone, opportunities for everyone, to the best of our ability as we grow and develop this hub. Now, as this started, this was not when we began to realize that we had the opportunity to work with student athletes. There was so much conversation in the media around what that's going to do to the sport, how is that going to affect programs. My interest had nothing to do with NIL at the beginning. It really had to do with student athletes. It's like now, legally, each of these student athletes are entrepreneurs. And now, just with the stroke of a pen, I mean, a lot of work, but overnight, essentially, Waco had 500 plus new entrepreneurs in its constituency. And so I said, we just thought to ourselves, we should try to create some help. Now, fortunately, Baylor has a very robust, amazing student-athlete development program through Baylor Built and other arms. And I just think that the attitude among the staff and the faculty, if you're a student-athlete, but especially if you're a student-athlete, you've got a lot of places you can go for help and support beyond athletics here at Baylor. That wasn't the issue as much as there were certain things the university was prohibited from helping with. And NIL was really one of those things that they could certainly, the focus on character, on excellence, development, leadership, these are all important attributes for student athletes and for anyone. But the school was prohibited from a regulatory perspective from working directly on NIL. And so that's how our work with students sort of shifted from just development to also saying, well, could we play a role here in helping to use the NIL space and the NIL realities as a new method of student-athlete development. So really, I think a lot of schools, now that we've become pretty educated in the space, you see that different schools have different philosophies of how NIL, what it should be. And it's so new, there isn't a lot of precedent, and there's sort of wildly varying approaches to this. And our approach at Startup Waco and through GXG, the program that we created to house the student-athlete development work, and Baylor's unique position and philosophy of how they view all of their students, and especially student-athletes, really became aligned here. And this is why it's been such a great relationship, is that we're able to do all the things that a typical collective would do. We're able to generate NIL deals. We're able to help make connections with the private markets to student athletes' work. But we're also able to look at the student athlete as an entity unto themselves, as an entrepreneur unto themselves. And just like we do in the community, we would run accelerators and incubators and helping. We would sit across from entrepreneurs, and a lot of entrepreneurs need a lot of the same things. They need help, advisory work, they need capital, they need some operational support. And student athletes are no different. They're taking the things that they have, and in many cases it's a platform, or it's the ability to leverage a platform that they have while being an athlete, which is a unique, incredibly helpful advantage. They also have constraints like any entrepreneur. They have time constraints. They have a lot are very young, and this is the first maybe business that they're starting.
Yeah.
So what I want to see happen is at Baylor to be the best place in the country that if you're a student athlete and you want to leverage up or lever up your platform into a business, and there's something that's actually meaningful beyond just athletics, and use NIL as a way of doing that, we want to be the place that you want to come to, because we've developed an infrastructure and a process that allows you to not just take a check, but actually take something and use that and leverage it to create something that's more sustaining. So Startup Waco is in the NIL space largely because we want to develop student athletes as entrepreneurs and as great business people and for their futures. And NIL is a great opportunity to do that. If you just give a check and it's here one day and it's gone, days later, that's not the goal here. That's not how this is structured. That would actually be almost impossible for that to happen with the structures that we've set up. But if any student athlete wants to say, well, how can I actually create something that's going to last, create something that's meaningful, then we've got a whole suite of resources that we can bring around you to do it.
Very well said.
I know. I'm like that. We
good.
work in this industry, and that was so educational to me. So I'm sure our listeners love hearing that. So this couldn't have just come to you overnight, right?
Yeah.
And you and your team. So what kind of, as NIL conversations started happening, and there were so many directions, it looked like this could go. How did Startup Waco kind of say, hey, if this does become a reality, this is the direction we're going to go with it?
Well, I knew from the beginning as we were initially having conversations, again, it started within Baylor Built because it was more student-athlete development. There was no point in us moving forward without the coordination of the university. And that was very limited back then of what they could and couldn't do. So we began to understand, how does this relationship work? Now, I want to be really clear. If you look at any university's messaging around what they do, they all say that they develop. They all say that they care about not just money, but money is going to help the community, but I think the proof is in how is that program structured. If you say that this is about helping the community or helping the student athlete, but the only structures that you have in place are just to pass money, then what you really care about is passing money. But if the structures that you have built up to actually develop that student athlete, bring additional resources beyond NIL to them, if they just want to grab onto them and do it, well, then that's what you care about, and that's what we care about. And because we sort of started with those development conversations, that gave us the framework for how now that we're dealing with NIL to keep that process going. Beginning talking through that development, it became clear that NIL was going to be here to stay. It became clear that there was a need, and it became clear that the structure of using a nonprofit organizations outside of the university was a method that was going to become popular. Now, you all can have the conversations about what this does to the sport and the conference and how that works. I just keep coming back to, this is an opportunity that we have now. We don't know what it'll be in the future, and if we can just apply a little bit of innovation and thinking to how we do this, then we can actually create something that is going to be a huge benefit to every student athlete at Baylor. And I think universities around the country are thinking about this, certainly talking about it a lot. But again, I always come down to what are they actually doing and how is their organization structured. And we've met with universities around the country. We have a pretty good sense for what a lot of schools from the West Coast, even in the South and even in the Big 12, are doing. I would put the the structure, the framework of what we're doing at GXG up against anything that we've seen in the country.
That was my next question. I mean, it seems like what we're doing, the way we're doing it at Baylor and through Startup Waco, is somewhat unique. I mean, I know there's a lot of different models out there. They've all just kind of taken off sometimes in different directions. But is that correct? Are we sort of unique in this?
Yes, and so this goes back to the structure conversation. So, most of these collectives that you see in the country have been set up specifically for the purposes of deploying NIL donor capital. We're not so they get their nonprofit status. Donor capital comes in, they deploy it according to their nonprofit mission, which is fine, perfectly legal, perfectly allowed, and that's what you see. But we are not that. We are functionally a collective for the sake of all helpful terminology, but we're not technically a collective because we weren't created for the purposes of NIL. We were created for the purposes of economic development. So we're okay. Like we're doing the NIL, but where we really get excited is when a student athlete, like I'll take Adam Flagler as an example, comes in and says, "I want to start a business," and we say, "Well, this is what we were made for. We weren't made for like NIL. Maybe got you in the door, but we're made to help you." Think about your goals. What do you need? What infrastructure do you need around you for you to be able to focus on what you're doing so that we can help you build something of value, of real, like we're not just talking money for now. We're talking about creating generational wealth through entrepreneurship. That's the end goal through with all of these programs that we're doing. So I would say that it's different just because fundamentally it is different. We are not an NIL first organization. We are a development first organization that's using NIL to advance that work.
John Passavant is our guest, CEO for Startup Waco. Really good information, and we've had the privilege of calling games, telling stories about Baylor athletics for a long time. Storytelling is an art, and there's a network in town doing just that. Rogue Media Network has produced over 80 original podcasts and shows ranging from comedy, true crime, business, and sports. If there's a story to tell, Rogue Media Network is telling it. You can find this podcast and all the other great Rogue Media Network shows on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
So, John, you've given us so many examples of the resources that are available to student athletes, the goal that hopefully student athletes are coming into y'all's offices and saying, hey, I want to start a business. So maybe a little more detail on that. What does that look like if I am a student athlete that has an idea? Do I just reach out? Do I come talk to you?
Sure. And to be clear, when we say start a business, it could be something like with Adam where you want to start a brand. It could be something like there's a couple of guys on the football team that we're starting a mobile app with, and it's an interesting project. We've already raised outside capital, so things are happening there. Or it could just be that, hey, I now have the ability to earn revenue through NIL, and so I want to structure myself as this entity better. So it doesn't have to be starting a large scalable growth company. It could be that I just want to manage these new resources better. So, but which is technically a business. So, so we multiple ways of getting in touch with us. We have a website. It's a subdomain of our website, gxg.startupwaco.com. And you can go in there, and there's a Student Athlete Connect portal where they can go in and just fill out information that comes directly to our team, and we can reach out. We're currently working with and communication with over 40% of the entire student athlete population just in the last few months. So from a student athlete engagement perspective, from a development organization, that's quite high. And it's very easy. We operate a co-working space downtown. They can walk in anytime. We're trying to make ourselves as available as possible. Obviously, in season it's difficult. This is one of the constraints that student athletes have, and we don't want to take them away from their academics and the athletic requirements that they have, but we're here for them. And another interesting point too, which I think sets Baylor in this initiative different, is this is not just for students that we're doing NIL deals with. Again, it's development first, NIL second. So anyone can come in, and you're seeing stories of maybe student athletes that don't have a high NIL value, but they might have a great business idea, and we could help them leverage this platform of being a student athlete for their benefit. So I've spoken to a lot of individuals that aren't even necessarily opposed to the idea of students making money, but they are opposed to just giveaways and handouts. And, are we really just raising more money to pass it out? And I had to get comfortable with that. I mean, on the surface, when you just read headlines, that's what you sort of think is happening. And again, how it all shakes out, I don't know. There's other groups that will be making those determinations. But while we have this opportunity, I can say with confidence that we are going to be using NIL as a way of getting to something much more meaningful for these student athletes. And if you have an issue or a problem with NIL as a concept, well, there's ways to get involved that you can just be focusing on the development aspect of it. And so we're working well with Baylor Built. We're working well with all the other community support and entrepreneur support organizations around the city, from the city of Waco and the county themselves to all the chambers of commerce. So there's a lot being done that stands apart from NIL, which is a difference compared to a lot of other programs.
You mentioned your co-working space downtown 605,
That's
right,
right.
Austin Avenue.
That's right.
Website, startupwaco.com.
That's
so
right.
if folks are listening to us, want to get a little more into that, that's where you can start to get more info on startup. The GXG we've mentioned a couple of times. Katie and I both learned today that's sort of green and gold, right?
That's right.
That's
That's
where
right.
that
I
came
like
from.
that.
Okay. Well, man, we should revisit some of the branding then. I was hoping that would be an obvious connection.
Obvious.
When you hear it, though, you don't know. But when you
Well, yeah.
when you see it in the colors, it maybe helps. But yeah,
No,
it stands
it's just
for
Katie and I.
gold.
It's
So I'm
just
sure
we're
it
the
is.
problem. Everyone else understands.
Once you know it, you know it.
Yeah,
though, so
that's
that's
true.
good.
That's it.
And that is just an arm, you say, to connect Baylor student athletes citywide with opportunities.
That's right.
And that is just part of what you're doing at
That's
Startup
right.
Waco.
Yeah, Startup Waco, we essentially have three different tracks that are pretty much three different workflows. We work with community companies, small businesses, micro enterprises. We find the groups of entrepreneurs in Waco and McLennan County that historically have had a hard time getting started, getting beyond that initial hump, whether it's due through a lack of education, a lack of capital, a lack of expertise, and we focus in on that. We do a lot of tactical training, but these are not high growth companies. These are very often just solopreneur kind of enterprises, but they make up a lot of the fabric. They're retailers and they're restaurants and the things that make our city, and will continue to do so, these small businesses. We have a whole suite of programs for that. And then we have a suite of programs for growth companies, specifically for companies that we want to see more of. We want to be able to make a case when we go to these different ecosystems in Dallas and Houston and Austin, and we sit down and we say, here's why you should start your company in Waco, or bring your company to Waco, your startup to Waco. We want to talk about easy access to capital and ways of access to talent, which had a lot of shifts over the last couple of years, which I think are more often than not in Waco's benefit. And then now we have this third arm with student athletes. So each of those programs, there's crossover there, there's help there, but they all kind of require a different focus and different nuances.
Well, very well.
That's awesome. So this GXG Green and Gold program, an impressive kind of grouping of different resources in terms of talent that you have on that team. So tell us a little bit about who makes up that 7-person team.
Yeah.
Is that 6 or 7 people?
Yeah. So within that, and a lot of those are, shared staff across all the different programs that we're doing, and they all have different roles. So Cody Carlson, former Baylor football player, and he and I work real closely together on thinking through a lot of a structure of this, and he's wonderful because he really embodies this sort of dichotomy that Startup Waco is with these different programs. He's was a big supporter of community entrepreneurs, was part of some of our accelerator programs, but now can just speak very intelligently and directly to student athletes as well. So he's been an excellent addition to the team over the past year. Jacob Kehoe, who's sort of the assistant director of the different programs, works a lot with growth companies, but also a Baylor grad and a huge fan and is real helpful. And so we all kind of we cross over a lot,
Yeah.
and we work a lot on it. But everybody from, if we hold an event and we have 30 athletes in, that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of someone who's making sure that we're getting documents signed and things processed properly and answering questions. And so, building up the infrastructure for that has been a fun process, a bit of a moving target. But as we get down the road more, it's been coming together well.
Good. As the new Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, said, the Big 12 is open for business, and which got a lot of attention.
Yes.
One on your website, you say Waco is open for business.
Yeah.
Is this what's the climate right now for entrepreneurs wanting to start up? I mean, is it a good time and a good spot here in Waco right now?
I certainly think so. I think Waco is an amazing place to be. This is something our mayor says a lot, but Waco is an amazing place to be if you want to be a part of building a city, if you want to be a part of building something, because you do have access. It's like all the layers within the city, from either successful entrepreneurs to city leadership to university, staff. It's pretty flat. There's a couple of degrees of separation. If you want to come and get poured into, this is a great place to be. I think access to talent is a challenge still, as it always has been, but I think there's been some breaks in Waco's favor over the past couple of years in that regard. I think access to capital, there isn't a culture of capital. There's one functioning venture fund in Waco, which operates out of our space, and they've got a great group of portfolio companies. But there isn't a culture of that yet, and so we're trying to build that up. But there doesn't necessarily have to be, as an entrepreneur myself, when I sit across the table from an entrepreneur, I'm not, the win for me fundamentally is not that they start their business in Waco. It's that they do what's best for their business. And I believe that if we have that mentality with every entrepreneur, we will have a lot of entrepreneurs coming back. But I want to be able to tell them and make a case and be serious of why they shouldn't move to Austin, or why they should stay here. So what are the things that we can uniquely major in? Who are the other businesses and the resources and the expertise that we can bring around these entrepreneurs to help start successful companies? We've got to be, I heard someone said this to me recently, but the size of a market that we have in Waco, we've got to be innovative in how we're thinking about attraction of companies. We've got to think outside the box. Otherwise, Austin is just too much of a draw, or Dallas is too much of a draw. Things are just easier there. They're larger. There's more capital flowing through. But if we can create unique sort of niches within this, then I think that it's just going to take a few. And we've had a few wins already. We've had a few companies exit in dramatic fashion. There's more things happening, but we really want to see it, just the volume of it increase, the deal flow increase. And so it's going to take some thoughtful innovation, good networking, connecting a lot of these different groups that maybe don't know that these other entrepreneurs exist, and how do I get connected to them, mentoring programs, all of this, which is why working with student athletes was a real obvious choice to me, because Baylor is such a part of the community. And if we could sort of bring some of that economic activity into the local market, that's just going to be a good thing for everyone. And so we're small enough as a city that we can make those types of bridges and connections and then be effective. And so we feel like it was worth doing. And so far it's been successful.
Yeah, that's so helpful to hear. So when you talk about, and this probably speaks to your relationship with anyone who comes through Startup Waco, but specifically through the lens of a student athlete, is the goal that one day they graduate from Startup Waco and they're off, whether hopefully it's in Waco, hopefully it's somewhere else, or is it, hey, this is a long-term relationship that could go past their 4 years of eligibility, 5, 6, 7?
Yeah, so there's a few different layers. So when it comes to NIL specifically, there are rules around how that's contained. So we don't do deals beyond eligibility, and so that's not our decision. That's an NCAA rule. And so when it comes to that specific aspect, there's some containment. But we treat a student athlete in the exact same way we treat any entrepreneur. We come in and everyone is unique. Everyone has a unique set of assets that they can leverage, a unique set of constraints and desires and thoughts of what they want to do. So every working relationship with any student athlete entrepreneur or any community entrepreneur starts largely in the same way. What's really cool with the student athletes is sometimes they don't even realize the platforms that they have. It's not just about your social media following. It's about being part of a larger system. And because of the investment that Baylor has made in student-athlete development over the past years, there is a culture of student-athlete support. And so we can help coordinate a lot of that and say, hey, you should really push Baylor Built to promote this and promote your business. Now let's just put that in a plan, and let's put that plan of what you want to do into a business plan. Now let's see what other things that we need to actually see it happen. So, we obviously don't. All of our work is specifically to enrolled students. We obviously can't speak to anyone who's committed or anyone who's looking to come to Baylor. So we're working with enrolled students. When you think about when I think about it from a recruitment standpoint down the line, if they're seeing student athletes that are starting successful businesses, just the optics of that is a very positive thing. Sure. That takes time. That's hard work. I'm under no illusion that every student athlete is going to, start a very successful business and then exit in a big way. But we've got to start. I think that we're seeing a lot of opportunity missed, and I think we can be a leader in this space when it comes to actually helping these student athletes create. So if it becomes a long-term relationship, great. I mean, but likely they're going to kind of move on, and that's great. We're gonna, like I said before about a community entrepreneur, if it's better for them to start their business in Austin, if I was them and I'd go to Austin and do it, that's fine, and that's good information for us. And maybe if they're down there and they grow their company and they sell it, they'll come back and realize, hey, I remember Startup Waco and Waco helped give me a start, and now I'll come back and feed the ecosystem. My goal through this program, I guess I've never actually had to think of it like this before, but it is not to prevent opportunities for student athletes. Sure. Saying like, well, you've got to stay here, and if you don't stay here, you don't do it. Obviously, if it's better for them to move on, whether it's after they graduate or that's their decision. But my whole thing is, while they're here, and while we have the attention and the opportunities, let's try to build something special. Yeah,
that's awesome. So clear and clean and well thought out for something that is messy and confusing and brand new. So I'm just so impressed by you and your team.
Yeah, and you articulate it very well. Yeah. So thanks for sharing with us. We really appreciate it. I know Katie and I have both learned a lot just really visiting with you, and hopefully our listeners have as well. And we appreciate everything you're doing, and fits right in with Mac's mantra of preparing champions for life.
That's
this is another avenue of that, to really prepare them for what's beyond Baylor.
Yeah, and I would say one other aspect is, this has all been more or less happening behind the scenes over the past year, 6 months as it's been formed. There hasn't been many opportunities for fans or members of the Baylor family to really engage. And this is something that we're actively working on. There's a lot of upcoming news that'll be released soon around how can, if you're just an observer, a fan, somebody who wants to see good student-athlete development move forward in conjunction with NIL, want to see it done right. I am open, for phone calls and meetings. We plan on having a series around the state of conversations with individuals around how to do this well and do it better, and to be a leader in it. But we are in the process of developing, and soon, I wish I could say more, but soon we're going to have ways for anyone who's interested to participate, not just in the knowledge of it, but actually participate both in the development and the NIL funding needs and all of it, and done in a clear way that says, okay, here's how I can support the effort. Baylor is saying, look, NIL is a reality in the NCAA. We want to do it differently by preparing champions for life. Here's a method in which we've chosen to do it. Just a clear, cohesive message, and very clear ways of engaging are on the horizon.
Wow, that's great. Very impressive. John, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you. Thank you both.
Have you been looking for a new podcast to listen to? Are you interested in true crime, funny one-star reviews, or inspiring stories? What about the history of Waco or the famous people who have lived and worked here? All these and more are produced by Rogue Media Network. There are over 80 different shows, including this one, with more coming all the time. If there's a story to tell, Rogue Media Network is telling it. Watch on YouTube or listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Really good, wasn't it, with John, to visit with him?
Yes, so helpful. And it just, gosh, you said it best. He articulates it so well. And it's complex. It's confusing.
Yeah, no, but really good. Website again, startupwaco.com. Their office, 605 Austin Avenue here in Waco. And we appreciate John Passavant, the CEO for Startup Waco, being our guest this week.
Yeah, I think so often NIL can be polarizing at times, right? There's people in one side of the equation or the other side, and there's two different camps. And I think the way that Startup Waco has kind of created this middle ground of, hey, here's where the NCAA is, and here's the way that we're going to help prepare champions for life is so encouraging to me. And like you said, so aligns with Baylor's mission.
Really, really impressive work. All right, that's our Sikkim podcast for this week, presented by Rogue Media Network. For Katie Smith, for our guest, John Passavant of Startup Waco, I'm John Morris. That's this week's Sikkim podcast.
You've been listening to the Sikkim Podcast, powered by Rogue Media Network. The Sikkim Podcast is a production of Baylor Athletics.
This has been a Rogue Media Network